Hey beauties and bees, welcome back to the show. Today we're going to start by talking about Chuan. You know how the Chuan origin series on Netflix was marketed as being based on real events? And most people tend to assume that's just marketing. But when people actually dug into it, they found that the cursed house at the center of the story, the one people keep entering and never leaving the same, was actually based on a real property in Nagua. And in the show, almost as a quiet acknowledgement of that, the house is painted yellow because the real one was yellow too. And decades before the films, before the shows, it was a house that people in that neighborhood were already terrified of. And that is what we're covering today, the yellow house. Hey guys, lately I've been really into mist type skincare, not just as a refreshing thing, but like actual treatment mists. So I feel like before mists were just water, but now some of these mist products are basically serums in spray form. And I've been testing a few that actually do something, so let me show you what I use. So this one is from Haruhara to Wonder. It's more of a barrier-focused mist. So it has fermented black rice, probiotics, ceramides, all the good stuff for calming your skin and keeping it hydrated long-term, and not just like for 5 seconds. And then there are the PDRN ones. You know, I didn't even know what a PDRN was before, but yeah, it's supposed to help with skin repair and elasticity, and now I'm literally obsessed with PDRN. These are the kind of mists where your skin just looks a bit healthier over time. You know, of course, not dramatic, but noticeable over time. The Metacube one is interesting because it's not just hydration. It's more brightening. So it has vitamin C and turmeric. So it gives that slightly fresher, clear look, but it's not harsh, which I like because, you know, strong vitamin C can be a bit much. It can be sticky, but it's not like that. So it's great. And then I have two that I keep reaching for during the day, like literally just sitting on my desk. So the Dr. Ala mist is actually a bit different. It's one of those jelly type mists. So when you shake it, the texture kind of breaks down into a really fine spray, but you still get that slightly thicker, more hydrating feel compared to a regular mist. So yeah, it's not watery in a disappearance in 2 seconds kind of way. It actually leaves a light layer on your skin, almost like you applied a very thin serum. And the Anua one, it's a bit more nourishing because of those little capsules inside. It feels slightly richer. So when my skin feels dry or tired, this is the one I grab. If you use the right ones, they actually help your skin stay balanced throughout the day. So yeah, if you've been ignoring mists like I did when I was young, I kind of get it. Yeah. But some of these are actually worth it. And if you want to try them, of course, you can buy these on Yes Style. And to get 12% off, you can use my code BATV12. Happy shopping! And now let's get back to the story. So, let me give you the full picture before we get into the actual stories about this house. The original Chuan movie came out in 2000. Director Takashi Shimizu made this movie on a tiny budget and shot the whole thing in just 9 days. A husband murders his wife Kayako and son Toshio in a fit of rage. But their deaths aren't the end of what happens in that house. They're the start. The house becomes the site of a curse. Anyone who walks in picks it up and it spreads through them to everyone around them. There is no way to stop it, no ritual that fixes it. It just keeps going. The film blew up and it led to a series of Chu movies, and Kayak Cole became one of the most iconic horror figures of all time. In 2020, Netflix put on Chu Origins, which, as I mentioned, leaned into the based on real events angle. Researchers who closely watched the show found it was actually weaving in real Japanese cases and real locations, not making direct adaptations, but pulling from things that actually happened. And one of those things was the Yellow House. The real Yellow House was in Ama district on the outskirts of the city of Nagoya near Timokuchi Station. It was a relatively small place, 2 stories tall, sitting on this awkward triangular plot where 2 roads meet at an angle. Apart from its yellow walls, it looked like a pretty unremarkable house from the outside. But by the time stories about this place were circulating online, the house had built up a reputation as one of the most genuinely feared places in the region. Not as a tourist attraction, as a place where locals would cross the street rather than walk directly past it. The core of the legend was this: whatever happened inside that house left something behind. And whatever that something was, it was still there, felt long after the house was supposed to be empty. That's the story. And to understand why people believed it, you first need to understand how Japan thinks about this kind of death. In Japanese tradition, when someone dies peacefully with the right rituals carried out, their soul just moves on. But not every death goes smoothly. If someone dies suddenly, violently, or in the middle of some overwhelming emotion, grief, anger, something unresolved, the soul can get stuck. It doesn't move on. It stays attached to the place where it died. And in that state, it becomes what's called a yude. And this is often translated into English as ghost. But it's more specific than that. It's a soul that literally cannot leave because the emotion anchoring it to this world is too strong. And the worst version of that is an uno, a vengeful spirit. And the thing about an ono that's different from how we typically think about ghosts in Western horror is that it doesn't just stay in one place. It can attach to people who enter the space and then it follows them. There is also this concept called tatari. Basically the idea that disturbing certain places carries real consequences, that the contamination, for a lack of a better word, isn't restricted to one physical space. And this is the lens through which people in Japan were already interpreting these things when the stories about the yellow house started spreading. So here is what actually happened in that house. At some point in the 1980s, a couple moved in, and for a while, things were ordinary. But gradually, the atmosphere inside the house began to change. The versions vary. Some mentioned financial trouble, some gambling debts. Others put it down to the strain families felt when Japan's economic situation was beginning to collapse. But whatever was happening inside that house started coming through the walls. Arguments loud enough, frequent enough that the neighbors knew the rhythms of it. They knew what the voices sounded like when things were escalating. They were starting to get vicious. And then one day it all stopped. Both of them were found dead inside the house. The exact details of what happened are murky. There is no clean public record of it. Some say that the wife, sick of her husband gambling money away, brutally murdered him before killing herself. Others say that the couple killed themselves after they became overwhelmed with their mounting debts. What people in the area understood was that whatever happened in that house, it ended violently. And according to everything we just talked about, that's precisely the kind of death that doesn't fully leave a place. And we don't need to look far for evidence of this. The two police officers who were called to the scene after the death, both of them were permanently affected by what they found inside that house. One of them lost his mind entirely and died. The other suffered a mental breakdown severe enough that he became a mere shell of his former self and required indefinite hospitalization. So what did they see? We have no idea. Whatever state the house was in when they walked through that door, whatever was inside those rooms, neither of them ever gave a clear account of it. All we know is that they went in, and after they came out, they were never the same. Despite these traumatic events, the property eventually sold and new residents moved in, mostly young couples. But no one who moved into this property ever stayed for long. Some inhabitants lasted a few months, others only days, and one of the couples is rumored to have left due to one of the partners suffering a mental breakdown. Another family left in a hurry, claiming the house was haunted. And here's where things get really strange. Because even during the stretches when the house was completely empty, no tenants, nobody listed at that address, neighbors would sometimes see lights on in the upper windows at night. And people walking past late at night started reporting something else. Voices coming from inside. Not clearly, not loud enough to make out words. Just the sound of two people talking. That specific rhythm of back and forth conversation or an argument, the same sound the neighbors had heard through the walls for months before the incident. Nobody was living there anymore. It was as if something in the house was running the same loop over and over. But the main thing, the thing that kept bringing people out there was the window. The upper left window specifically. What people described seeing there across many different accounts over many years was a woman kneeling near the glass, not moving. And the consistency of the descriptions is honestly the part that I find hardest to just explain away because it's not like people were reporting vague shapes or shadows. They were describing the same specific thing, same window, same position, same figure, same details across accounts from people with no connection to each other. One guy, I'll call him Kinty, wrote about going there one summer evening with two friends. They parked on the narrow road across from the building and sat in the car for a while, arguing about who would be the first to get out. And he was the one who noticed the window. At first, he thought it was just a pale object. But then he realized there was a figure kneeling close to the glass, very pale, long, dark hair, completely still. And he thought for a second it might be a mannequin or some kind of prank setup. So he pointed it out to his friends, and they both saw it too. So they just sat there for a while, waiting to see if the figure would move. And then it did slowly, unnaturally. The head turned not toward the window, toward them, and they got out of there right away. And nobody spoke for the first 20 minutes of the drive home. And Kenji said he couldn't stop checking the rearview mirror just in case. Now again, if it was just one account on one night, it could be explained in a lot of ways. But then you find another account with the same window, the same figure, the same turn of the head, and another one person who documents haunted locations across Japan. A writer who goes by the name Hiding from Japanese Ghosts visited the Yellow House before it was finally demolished. And they generally approach these places with skepticism, but even they noted that the building felt super creepy, especially on the upper floor. Not only that, they also recorded stories from visitors who claimed to have seen shapes moving through walls or disappearing into empty rooms. Even with experience investigating similar locations, they describe the atmosphere here as unusually unsettling. There is also an account from a woman I will call Midiko. She'd grown up near the area and knew about the house, but hadn't really thought much of it. Most people probably wouldn't, except one evening she was walking home past the house and she heard a woman's voice coming from inside, and not clearly, she couldn't make out the words, more like the sound of someone talking in the next room. So when she heard this low, continuous sound, she stopped, and then the voice stopped. And then she heard footsteps upstairs, slow, going back and forth across the room, like someone pacing. And she said the thing that stayed with her wasn't really the fear in that moment. It was the quality of the footsteps. They didn't sound frantic or lost or confused. They sounded patient, like whatever was up there wasn't in a hurry. So those are the two most detailed accounts. But across multiple sources, a few other things kept coming up, and together they paint a very specific picture of what this house was doing to people. First, during Japan's Ubuntu festival, when the boundary between the living and the dead is believed to be at its thinnest, people would enter the house on a dare. And after a few years, no one would live in this house and it started to fall apart. The gradual decay of the building combined with the stories made it incredibly tempting to a certain thrill-seeking type of person. But those who entered the property were reportedly heard screaming and begging for mercy, like they were being physically attacked. Witnesses described it as real raw terror. The police were called, and after entering the building, the responding officers reportedly started running around like madmen, eyes darting around the garden, screaming, "Who's there? Who's there?" And second, there's the ground floor room with a glass door facing the street. Multiple accounts mention something appearing inside. Not the woman in the window, but something else. The descriptions are always vague, almost like people couldn't bring themselves to say exactly what they saw. But there was one consistent detail. It only appeared when someone inside was losing their mind, as if this, whatever it was drawn to people in that state. And that's the full picture. Different phenomena in different parts of the house, but the same building and the same fear. So after all that, the obvious question is, what was actually going on in that house? Why was it so bad? And people who've looked into this have landed on a few different explanations. None of them provable, but all of them uncomfortable in their own way. The most straightforward one is just the deaths themselves. Two people, a violent, unresolved ending, no proper ritual, no closure within the framework of everything we talked about earlier. That's exactly the kind of death that produces an Uno, a vengeful spirit. The woman in the window, the voices, the footsteps, all of it is consistent with the idea of a spirit anchored to the place where she died. We're playing the last weeks of her life on a loop she can't get out of. And that is the baseline story. It explains the most common accounts. But then you have to explain the police officers. Because if you accept that something was left behind after the death of the first couple, then whatever those two officers encountered when they walked in wasn't just a residual haunting. It was something that actively broke two trained professionals. And some people who follow this case closely have pointed out something that doesn't get talked about much. That according to certain accounts, the officers themselves became part of what people started seeing in the house. Not the woman in the window, something else. The idea being that the house didn't just hold on to its original occupants. It held on to everyone it claimed, which is almost exactly how Ju-On works. The next theory goes further back. There is an unverified rumor that the triangular plot of land the house was built on was previously used as a burial ground. That at some point the graves were relocated, but not with the care or ritual that tradition requires. No prayers, no ceremony, just bodies moved. And in the framework of Tatari, that is not just disrespectful, it's an invitation. It means whatever was resting in that ground had its rest disturbed and was given no path back to its body. So it stayed. A house got built on top of it, and a couple moved in, and whatever spirit was already there now had walls around it, a single place it was tethered to. Again, this is all unverified, of course, but it would explain why the deaths of that one couple produced something so much larger than just one simple haunting. And the final theory is the one that I find strangest because it's not about the people or the spirits at all. It's about the shape of the land. In Japanese geomancy, the traditional belief system around how land, roads, and structures interact spiritually, triangular plots are considered inherently unstable. Normal plots of land have clear boundaries. Energy flows through them in a predictable way. But a wedge of land formed where two roads cross at an angle sits in a kind of dead zone where this flow of energy gets disrupted. There's no outlet. Things that enter that space, spiritually speaking, tends to stay. And the house was built on exactly that kind of plot. Nobody designed it to be sinister. It was just a cheap way to use an awkward piece of land. But if you can take the geomantic theory seriously, the house was compromised before anyone ever moved in. So the couple's deaths didn't create the problem. They just made it visible. The house doesn't exist anymore. It was torn down at some point. And there doesn't seem to be a clear consensus on when that happened, but we know it did. That triangular plot near Chimakuji Station is now just a small parking lot. Nothing is there to mark its complicated history. No plaque, nothing. People park there and go about their day, possibly with no knowledge at all of these disturbing things that happened on that small, awkward plot of land. But I did want to mention one thing before I wrap up because I think it's interesting. Japan has this formal legal category for properties associated with violent deaths. They're called chikabuken, which roughly translates to stigmatized properties. So, real estate agents are legally required to disclose that history to the first people who move in after the event. And these properties, of course, typically sell for significantly less than comparable ones nearby, sometimes 30 to 50% less. And there are even websites that map them. So in Japan, this isn't just folklore. It's a legal and financial reality. The idea that what happened in a place leaves something behind is taken seriously enough to be written into property law, which I think says something. And maybe it's why the Yellow House, a real building where something terrible happened and then strange things kept happening for years afterward, ended up echoing through one of the most famous horror franchises ever made. Anyway, that's the Yellow House. And if you've been to a place that just felt wrong or have an unusual story of your own to share, drop it in the comments. I will see you next time. And until then, bye-bye. Yeah, down, down.